In 1983, I took a spiritual detour. I'm not proud of that, but this detour I took took me about 11 years to recover from it. My detour, guys, was my addiction to pornography. I had just finished seminary. I was 29 years old. I was single, moved to a new town. Didn't really know anybody there, especially didn't know any Christian girls. And it seemed like when I was around a lot of Christian girls that I knew, it kept my sex drive down for some reason, and I saw them as people, not as objects. But in this new town, with not having any Christian girls to talk to, I began to look at girls purely as sex objects. And my theme song, which I had adopted when I was a teenager, "I'm a Girl Watcher," was still in play. And so I began to struggle with that whole my attitude toward women. And I was staying in this particular city. Unfortunately, a lot of the preachers that I worked with, I was doing denominational work as an ordained minister, and a lot of these men were involved in extramarital affairs and preaching the gospel. In fact, my boss, who was a millionaire, would often tell me about his sexual exploits, and the only reason he stopped was because he was too old. His chauffeur told me I should be humping every night and basically having sex every night. In fact, for a long time, they thought I was a homosexual because I wasn't sleeping around. And that was the environment I was in. Yet, I can't blame them for what happened to me. I take full responsibility for the wrong choice I made and some lifelong consequences. But one night at my pastor's house, they had gone to bed. I was staying up because he had cable TV. I didn't have cable TV. And I was channel surfing. And I hit the Playboy channel during my surfing, and all the nudity and the sex caught my attention. And even though I heard the Holy Spirit screaming at me to change channels, I didn't. As I watched that, I found out years later that watching pornography releases a chemical in your brain, so I began to get addicted to it. That night, unfortunately, I went from just the lust of the eyes and the chemical addiction into masturbation. And so all of a sudden, without realizing it, I was struggling with lust, these chemicals, and masturbation, and all giving me temporary pleasure, but basically destroying my life. I took my sexual addiction, my pornography, into my marriage. I was a virgin, but I was a technical virgin when I got married. And even in my marriage, I began to find that the pornography was keeping me from developing real intimacy with my wife. And intimacy is really developed outside the bedroom, not in the bedroom. And during this time, if we have conflict or if we were having a problem and I knew I wasn't going to have sex that night with her, it wasn't a big deal. So sometimes I just copped out of working through the difficulties. But eventually I found that the pornography owned me, I didn't own it. My reasoning became really stupid. I thought if I took 3 or 4 days off, it's okay to preach, if I asked for forgiveness. But I guess because I knew I was going to do it again, I didn't really feel forgiven. I felt a lot of shame. And I struggled with it. But finally, through God's grace, I got deliverance. John Avant and Henry Blackaby were going around the country in 1994, sharing about revival. And the way they did it was they would share John's story of a personal revival and then how it broke out in his church, which actually broke out in several Christian campuses around the country. And they share and confess their sin. They'd have a mic and say, if anybody wants to confess their sin, just come up here and do it. There was no music, there was nothing. And the first time I saw that, I was really convicted that I needed to go up and confess my sin, but I didn't. My executive director for the organization I was working with, denominational organization I was working for in Illinois, brought that back to our home office. And as they were doing it, I was really convicted I needed to do it. But as the only African American there, I didn't want to do it. And so often in Christian communities, African Americans and people of color are always deemed as more sexually promiscuous than anybody else. So I didn't want to fit the profile. But God wouldn't let me go. And so I finally got up and shared my addiction to pornography and asked God's forgiveness. And what happened was some godly men had me get on my knees, and they laid hands on me and prayed over me. And this guilt that I felt lifted off my shoulders. Unbelievable. And at that time, I had not confessed to my wife because I didn't know I was going to confess in public. And so I went home to Brenda, and probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life was sit down and tell this beautiful woman who committed her life to me that I'd been addicted to pornography. And even though I told her I was addicted before we got married and I carried into my marriage, I don't think that made it any easier. I asked her for forgiveness. She's an amazing, strong woman. She forgave me. And she's never brought it up or said a word about it since 1994. Guys, when I did that with my wife, I probably was not the smartest thing to do right away. I didn't think about her. I didn't think about her spiritual maturity. I didn't think she wanted to hear it, that she was willing to hear it. I just dumped it on her, and I felt great. But guys, I've learned since then that as I counsel other people, that you need to really become a student of your wife. I think the goal is we should share our sin with our wife so there's nothing between us, but you need to make sure she's ready to hear it. And if your marriage is struggling, you may need to spend 6 months to a year or 2 years just building that relationship, spending time through the Word, spending time through in prayer. So when you do share it with her, there's a foundation you can look back on, and she can look back and say, you're not the same guy you used to be, you're different. So I encourage you to do that. Also, guys, my deliverance, one of my friends is a Christian sex therapist, and when I shared this story with him, he says it's very unusual for a guy to come off pornography pretty much by himself. He says usually you need to be in a group of men, and so I think being at a men's retreat, so you have some sense of accountability. I now have an accountability partner that makes a big difference. And there are also some other resources, guys, if you're struggling with pornography, how you can get off of pornography. But I just want to encourage you that there is help. So, guys, I want you to know with Christ, he can make a tremendous difference. This is a safe place to share your struggles, and that you can defeat pornography. I've been clean basically since 1995, and I don't take any credit in that. It's just the grace of God has changed my life, and we put some boundaries in to keep me out of trouble. That means I don't run through video stores because I can't look at all the half-naked women and stuff like that. So there are some boundaries and some consequences. I will always struggle with the temptation of pornography. I'm a recovering guy who pursued pornography, and I have to be aware of that. It's been really hard to share this with you, but I hope if it helps you, then that's what it's all about. And I'm here for you guys. And God's taken my bad thing, Romans 8:28, made it good to make a difference in people's lives. God bless you.